She buried her stepdaughter on a Tuesday. The casket was polished. The eulogy was perfect. The tears, manufactured down to the last quiver of her bottom lip. Odette stood before 200 of the city's most powerful people, gripping the podium like she owned the earth beneath it. And now, she believed she did. One casket held her husband. The other? Empty. Because 3 days ago, 40,000 feet above a Korean mountain range, Odette looked her stepdaughter dead in the eyes and pushed her out of a helicopter. The priest opened his Bible, the violinist drew her bow, and the mourners bowed their heads for a moment of silence. A moment that never came. Because cutting through the gray clouds like the wrath of God himself was a matte black military helicopter, descending so low the downdraft ripped every white rose off both caskets and scattered them across the cemetery like confetti at a funeral nobody was supposed to survive. The chopper touched down on the grass. The heavy side door slid open with a metallic scream, and the woman who was supposed to be inside that empty casket stepped out. Nora, alive, untouched. Draped in a heavy, structured black mourning gown that looked less like grief and more like armor. Sleek hair pulled tight, makeup sharp enough to cut glass, standing with the kind of terrifying calm that only belongs to someone who has already decided your fate. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, one step back, one hand barely grazing the small of her back, stood a man the entire Korean underworld calls the Untouchable. Young Jae. Pitch black bespoke suit sculpted to his broad frame like a second skin. No tie. Top button undone. The kind of arrogant, relaxed dominance that said he didn't need a weapon because he was the weapon. His face was carved from ice, jaw locked, eyes empty of mercy, scanning the crowd like a predator deciding which animal to eat first. He didn't look at the mourners. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked directly at Odette. And he smiled. Not a warm smile, not a polite smile, the kind of smile a man gives you when he already has the footage of you committing murder, saved on 3 encrypted servers and a team of lawyers circling your empire like vultures. Odette's handkerchief hit the ground. Her daughter Cressida grabbed her arm. And every single person in that cemetery understood the same thing at exactly the same moment. This was not a funeral anymore. This was a sentencing. 3 days ago, Nora didn't know she was about to die. She was sitting in the back of a private helicopter, phone propped against the window, filming a vlog of the mountain range spreading out beneath her like a frozen painting. She was smiling, actually smiling, because for the first time in months, her stepmother Odette and stepsister Cressida had invited her on what they called a bonding trip. Her father, Silas, was dying. Everyone knew it. The empire he had built, the one that controlled half the commercial real estate in the country, needed an heir. And Silas, despite Odette's years of manipulation, had made his choice. Nora. Odette found the will. She read every word, and she decided that the only thing standing between her and billions was one girl and 40,000 feet of open air. So when the bribed pilot leveled the helicopter over the most remote stretch of the Korean mountain range, and Cressida distracted Nora by pointing at something out the window, Odette stood up, walked behind her stepdaughter, and with both hands flat against Nora's back, pushed. Nora didn't scream on the way down. She couldn't. The wind swallowed everything. Her voice, her breath, her world. She tumbled through freezing air, arms clawing at nothing, until her body slammed into the surface of a roaring, ice-cold mountain river so hard it nearly broke her in half. The current dragged her under. The rocks tore at her skin. The cold tried to shut her organs down one by one, but Nora fought. She clawed. She refused. And when the river finally spit her out onto a rocky shore, broken, bleeding, barely conscious, she had no idea that the stretch of wilderness she had washed up on was not abandoned. It was owned. Every square mile of that mountain range, every tree, every rock, every drop of that freezing river, all of it belonged to the private, heavily guarded estate of the most dangerous man in Seoul. Young Jae. He was standing on his fortress balcony when his surveillance team flagged the anomaly, a body in his river. He watched through binoculars as his men pulled her from the water. Soaked, shattered, clutching a phone in a death grip so tight they had to pry her fingers open. A phone that was still recording. A phone that had captured everything. When Young Jae's tech team extracted the footage, the crystal-clear 4K vlog of a woman being pushed out of a helicopter by her own family, he didn't call the police. He didn't call a hospital. He walked into the room where Nora lay unconscious, pulled a chair beside her bed, sat down, and waited. Because in his world, a woman who survives a 40,000-foot fall with murder evidence still clutched in her hands isn't a victim. She's an opportunity. And when Nora finally opened her eyes to find the most terrifying man in Korea sitting 2 feet away, watching her with those cold, calculating eyes, he said 5 words. "I know who pushed you." That was 3 days ago. Now Nora is standing in the middle of a cemetery, alive, armored in black, holding the arm of a man who moves through the world like death itself, staring down the woman who tried to erase her from existence. And she is calm. Because Nora didn't just survive the fall, she survived it with proof. And the man standing behind her? He didn't just save her life. He brought an army, a legal team, and the kind of quiet, surgical fury that doesn't just ruin people, it erases them. Odette wanted an empire. She's about to find out what it feels like when a real empire comes for you. But how did we get here? How did a girl who was pushed from the sky end up standing in a cemetery with the deadliest man in Korea wrapped around her like a weapon? That story starts with a phone call. And the worst mistake Nora ever made. She trusted family. If this story already has your heart racing, subscribe now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this is about to get so much worse before it gets better. And I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. 3 days before she crashed her own funeral, Nora was happy. Not the careful, measured kind of happiness she had learned to perform around Odette and Cressida, but real, stupid, dangerous happiness, the kind that makes you drop your guard, the kind that kills you. It started with a phone call. Odette's voice on the other end, soft and trembling, the way it always sounded when she wanted something. "Your father's getting worse, Nora. The doctors say days, maybe a week. He keeps asking for one thing. He wants to see his girls together. All 3 of us. One last memory before." She let the sentence break. She let the silence do the work. And Nora, 23 years old, exhausted from weeks of hospital vigils, desperate to believe that her dying father's wife might actually have a heart, said yes. She made one critical error that day. She confused Odette's performance with love. That mistake almost cost her everything. The trip was Cressida's idea. Or at least, that's how they presented it. A private helicopter ride through the Korean mountain range. Silas had always loved the mountains, they said. So they would fly over the peaks, film the views, bring the footage back to his bedside so he could see the world one last time through his daughter's eyes. Nora packed her phone, a light jacket, and the kind of blind trust that her father had always warned her about. The helicopter was a sleek black Airbus, chartered under one of Odette's shell companies. The pilot was a thick-necked man named Duval, who didn't make eye contact with Nora when she climbed aboard. He shook Odette's hand, though, held it a beat too long. Nora didn't notice. "This is going to be beautiful," Nora said, turning her phone toward Cressida with a wide, open smile. "Dad's going to love this." Cressida smiled back. It was the smile of a woman who already knew what was coming in the next 20 minutes, and had made peace with it over brunch. In Korean crime families, loyalty isn't earned. It's tested. Young Jae's test for loyalty makes Odette's scheming look like a children's game. They lifted off at 11:47 a.m. For the first 30 minutes, it was everything Nora had hoped for. The helicopter climbed above the city's gray sprawl and pushed north, where concrete gave way to dark green forest, and forest gave way to raw, jagged mountain peaks dusted with snow. Nora pressed her face to the glass like a child, exchanged a glance. Odette checked her exchanged a glance. Odette checked her watch. 43 minutes into the flight. Below them, the terrain had shifted to a deep, narrow gorge carved by a roaring whitewater river. Remote, violent, surrounded by nothing but vertical rock and freezing mist. Odette unbuckled her seatbelt. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She stood up with the calm of a woman crossing a hotel lobby, steadied herself against the cabin ceiling, and nodded once at Duval. The pilot reached for a panel on his left. The side door of the helicopter unlocked with a heavy mechanical thunk and then slid open. The sound hit first. A wall of wind so loud and so violent it swallowed everything. The rotor noise, the engine hum, Nora's voice mid-sentence. Her hair whipped sideways. Her phone nearly flew out of her hands. She gripped it and turned, confused, mouth open, trying to ask why the door was open at 40,000 feet. And she saw Odette standing behind her. Not sitting, standing. Feet planted, hands raised, eyes completely empty. Odette, what? Cressida grabbed the back of Nora's jacket and yanked her sideways toward the open door. Nora's hip hit the edge of the frame. Her legs swung out into open air. She screamed, a raw, shredded sound that the wind stole before it could reach anyone, and her hands clawed at the doorframe, fingers white, tendons straining, fighting for the 2 seconds of grip that separated her from the void. Odette leaned down, close enough for Nora to see the pores on her stepmother's skin, close enough to smell her perfume, that heavy, cloying jasmine she always wore. "Your father should have left the money to me," Odette said. Not shouting, not whispering, just stating a fact, the way you'd read a receipt. Then she placed both palms flat on Nora's chest and pushed. Nora's fingers ripped free from the doorframe, her body tilted backward into nothing. And for one frozen, silent second, she hung in the air, suspended between the helicopter and the earth, between life and death, between the woman she was and the woman she was about to become. Then gravity took her. She fell. The wind didn't feel like wind. It felt like a wall, solid, freezing, slamming into every inch of her body at once, spinning her, flipping her, stripping away everything except raw animal terror. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't see. The sky and the mountains blurred into a single roaring smear of white and gray and green, and somewhere in the chaos her phone was still clutched in her right hand, not because she chose to hold it, but because her fingers had locked around it in a death grip that her brain no longer controlled. The river came up fast. 1 second, it was a thin silver line carved into the gorge below. The next second, it was everything. A churning, frothing, ice-white monster filling her entire field of vision. She hit the water at an angle. The wind had tilted her body sideways, and that tilt was the only reason she didn't die on impact. Instead of slamming spine first into the surface like concrete, she entered the river at a diagonal, her left shoulder taking the worst of it. The pain was so immediate and so absolute that it whited out her vision. She felt her shoulder dislocate. She felt 3 ribs crack along her left side like dry sticks. She felt the cold. Not cold like winter. Cold like death. Cold like her blood had been replaced with liquid nitrogen. The current took her instantly. She was underwater before she could gasp, dragged along the bottom of the river like a rag doll, her body bouncing off submerged rocks, her lungs burning, her arms flailing in water so fast and so violent that swimming was a joke. But Nora fought. She didn't fight smart. She didn't fight pretty. She fought the way a drowning animal fights. Ugly, desperate, driven by the single screaming reflex that every living thing has buried in its bones. Not yet. Her good arm clawed upward, her legs kicked against rock. Her head broke the surface once, twice, long enough to suck in half a breath of frozen air before the current dragged her under again. The river carried her for almost 2 miles. It broke her against boulders. It pulled her through rapids that would have killed a man twice her size. It tried over and over to hold her under. Nora refused. She washed up on a flat, rocky shore where the river widened and the current slowed to something survivable. She crawled out of the water on one arm, dragging her dislocated shoulder behind her, and collapsed face down on the wet stones. Blood ran from a gash above her left eye. Her lips were blue. Her breathing was shallow and wrong. Her left hand was still locked around her phone in a grip so tight that the tendons had cramped into place. She lay there, broken, bleeding, half dead, on a shore she didn't know, in a country that had just tried to kill her. And she had no idea that she had just washed up on the most dangerous piece of private land in all of South Korea. Now, here's what Odette didn't know. Here's the detail that turned her perfect murder into the single worst decision of her life. The mountain range didn't belong to the government. It didn't belong to a corporation. It didn't appear on any public land registry, and no satellite survey had ever been permitted to photograph it from above. It belonged to young Jay. Every peak, every valley, every frozen river, and every square foot of forest for 100 miles in every direction. All of it was the private, heavily fortified estate of the man that Seoul's underworld referred to only as the boss. Not a boss, not their boss, the boss. The one you don't name in rooms that might be wired. The one whose organization didn't have a name because naming it would imply it was something you could identify, contain, or challenge. The Korean syndicate operates under a code so brutal that even rival organizations pay tribute rather than test it. How young Jay built that code and who died establishing it is a story for another time. Odette thought she had planned the perfect crime. She chose the most remote mountain range on the map. She chose coordinates where no one would hear a scream. No one would see a body. No one would ever find what was left. She was so wrong it almost doesn't feel real. Because she didn't just drop Nora into a random wilderness. She dropped her stepdaughter directly into the private backyard of the single most lethal, untouchable, connected human being in the Korean underworld. She literally delivered her problem, gift-wrapped, with video evidence, to the one man on Earth capable of destroying her. Young Jay was standing on the east balcony of his mountain fortress, a brutalist compound of black concrete and reinforced glass, carved into the mountain face like a scar, when the alert came through his earpiece. Perimeter breach, Sector 7, the river. He lowered the ceramic cup of tea he'd been holding. What kind? Unclear. Thermal signature. One body. Alive. Barely. He walked to the edge of the balcony and raised a pair of military-grade binoculars to his eyes. 800 meters below, on the rocky bank where his river widened into a natural pool, he could see it. A dark shape, motionless, crumpled against the wet stones like something the water had chewed up and spat out. A woman. Young Jay watched for 6 seconds. Then, bring her in. 6 seconds. That's all the time he needed to make a decision that would change Nora's life, destroy Odette's empire, and set into motion the most devastating funeral crash in the history of this city. 6 seconds. But what was happening back in the city while Nora lay bleeding on young Jay's shore? Odette was already moving, and what she did next was so cold, so calculated, that it makes the helicopter push look merciful. 40 minutes after Nora hit the water, 12,000 miles away in a private hospital suite, Odette walked through the door with mascara streaked down her face and collapsed at her husband's bedside. Silas was awake. The machines were still beeping, but slower now. The rhythm of a heart that had been giving up for months and was finally close to finishing the job. His skin was gray. His eyes were sunken. But when he saw Odette's face, the tears, the trembling hands, the shattered expression she had rehearsed in the car, his fingers tightened on the bedsheet. "Where's Nora?" His voice was barely a sound, more like air shaped into words. Odette grabbed his hand, squeezed, let a single, perfectly timed sob escape her throat. "There was an accident, Silas. The helicopter. Something went wrong with the door. Nora was filming near the opening, and the wind. Odette covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook. "She fell, Silas. Nora fell. She's gone." The monitors didn't spike. They didn't beep faster or flash red. That's not how a heart breaks when it's already barely holding together. Instead, there was a single, awful moment where everything in Silas's body just stopped trying. His eyes went wide, not with pain, but with the kind of understanding that comes when you realize the one thing you spent your entire dying breath trying to protect has been taken from you. His hand went limp in Odette's grip. The flatline tone was steady, clean, and final. Odette didn't just push Nora out of a helicopter. She walked into a dying man's room and used his love for his daughter as the final bullet. She murdered him with 6 words. Nora fell. She's gone. His heart couldn't survive the grief of losing his child, and Odette knew it wouldn't. She was counting on it. Odette held his hand for another 30 seconds. Not for grief, for appearance. 2 nurses rushed in. A doctor followed. Odette stood, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and walked into the hallway where Cressida was waiting on a bench, scrolling through her phone. Cressida looked up. "Done?" Odette smoothed the front of her blouse, adjusted her ring, took one long, settling breath. Both of them, in the same afternoon. She said it the way someone would say they'd finished 2 errands before lunch. "Call the lawyer. We need to file for the estate before the news cycle picks this up." Cressida stood, pocketed her phone, and fell into step beside her mother. Neither of them looked back at the room where Silas's body was still warm. 2 people dead. 1 empire seized, and Odette thought she had won. But 9,000 feet above sea level, in a fortress carved into a mountain, a woman was waking up, and the man sitting beside her bed had already seen the footage. He already knew who Odette was. He already knew what she'd done, and he was already planning. 9,000 feet above sea level, in a room with no windows and walls lined with medical equipment that belonged in a trauma ward, Nora opened her eyes. The ceiling was black concrete. The light was cold and surgical. The air smelled like antiseptic and pine, clean, sharp, and completely foreign. She tried to sit up, and her entire left side detonated with pain so severe she bit through her bottom lip and tasted blood. A hand pressed against her good shoulder and pushed her back down. Firm, not gentle. She blinked, focused, and saw him. Young Jay was sitting in a steel chair beside the bed, legs crossed at the ankle, one arm draped over the armrest, watching her with the expression of a man reading a document that hasn't yet proven itself interesting. His suit was immaculate, pitch black, no tie, the collar open just enough to communicate that formality was something he permitted, not something he obeyed. His jaw was a straight, hard line. His eyes were dark and flat and gave away absolutely nothing. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask how she felt. He sat there, still as stone, and studied her the way you study something you're deciding whether to keep or throw back. Everyone told Nora that the most dangerous people announced themselves with threats. They were wrong. The most dangerous man she'd ever met announced himself with silence. "Your shoulder is dislocated, 3 ribs fractured, lacerations across your back and scalp, hypothermia, early stage." His voice was low, unhurried, and carried the kind of quiet authority that made shouting unnecessary. "My men pulled you from my river. You were holding a phone." Nora's breath caught. Her right hand moved instinctively to her side, empty. Where is it? Her voice was wrecked. Gravel and broken glass. With my team. He tilted his head, barely a centimeter. The phone is waterproof. The camera was still recording when we extracted you. Would you like to know what we found on it? Nora's chest tightened. Not from the broken ribs. From something worse. We found 14 minutes of continuous footage, young Jay continued. The first 12 minutes are scenic. Mountains, clouds, a woman narrating to her father. The last 2 minutes are different. He paused. Let the silence sit. The last 2 minutes show 2 women unbuckling their seatbelts, a pilot opening the cabin door at altitude, and the woman who was narrating, you, being physically pushed out of the helicopter by an older woman in a jasmine-colored blouse. Nora didn't move. Every muscle in her battered body had gone rigid. The footage is 4K, he said. The faces are perfectly clear. The audio captured a statement made by the older woman before the push. My team has already identified her. Odette Mensah-Laurent, wife of Silas Mensah, controlling partner of the Mensah Group, currently estimated net worth. He glanced at a slim tablet beside him. 6.8 billion as of your father's most recent portfolio valuation. He set the tablet down, looked at her again. So, you are Nora Mensah, daughter of Silas, the one the financial pages say is named in his will as sole heir to the empire, and the woman who pushed you out of that helicopter is the same woman who stands to inherit everything if you're dead. Nora's jaw clenched, her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She didn't break. She lay on that bed with 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder and stared back at the most dangerous man she had ever been in a room with, and she held. I need to call my father, she said. Young Jay was quiet for a moment, a long moment. The kind of silence that carries weight, that warns you something is coming that you're not going to survive hearing. She thought the helicopter was the worst thing that would happen to her that week. She was wrong. What came next broke something the fall couldn't reach. Your father died 4 hours ago, he said. Cardiac arrest. It was reported on 3 networks within the hour. The cause? He watched her face. Was described as sudden onset, triggered by severe emotional distress. The hospital staff confirmed that his wife delivered the news of your death to him shortly before he died. He let every word land. He didn't soften them. He didn't cushion the blow or wrap it in condolence. He told her the truth the way a blade tells you it's sharp, by cutting. Nora didn't scream. She didn't gasp. Something inside her. Something deep. Something foundational. Something that had been holding her together since the moment she hit the water, cracked apart silently. Her face didn't crumble. It hardened. Her eyes went wet, but the tears didn't fall. They sat there, suspended, burning, like liquid fury refusing to give Odette the satisfaction of gravity. Her father was dead. Not from illness, not from the disease that had been eating him alive for months. He died because Odette walked into his hospital room and told him his daughter was gone, and his heart, already broken, already failing, simply could not survive the lie. Odette didn't just kill Nora's father. She used Nora's death as the murder weapon. She killed him. Nora's voice was quiet, flat, entirely new. She killed both of us. Young Jay didn't nod. He didn't agree. He simply watched. The way a man watches a blade being forged, waiting for the metal to reach the right temperature. Your stepmother has already filed for emergency control of the Mensah estate, he said. She is claiming inheritance under the provisions of your father's will, a will that names her as secondary beneficiary in the event of your death. Within 48 hours, she will control everything your father built. Nora turned her head on the pillow and looked at him fully, not with fear, not with gratitude, with something raw and scalding and utterly precise. Help me. 2 words. That's all she gave him. No begging, no explanation, no negotiation. Young Jay uncrossed his ankles. He leaned forward in the chair, slowly, deliberately, until his elbows rested on his knees, and his face was close enough to hers that she could see the faint scar running along his jawline, the kind of scar you get from a knife held by someone who almost succeeded. "I don't help people," he said. "Help is charity. Help is temporary. Help is something you give to strangers and then forget about." He held her gaze. "I claim people. I take what is mine and I protect it with everything I command. And what I command, Nora Mensa, is an empire that makes your father's fortune look like pocket change." He stood, buttoned his suit jacket with one hand, looked down at her with those cold, bottomless eyes. "Stand with me, and I will burn every person who touched you to the ground. Your stepmother, her daughter, the pilot. Every lawyer, every accountant, every corrupt official who helped them bury you. I will dismantle them so completely that the world will forget they ever existed." He extended his hand. "But you stand with me, not behind me, not beneath me, beside me. Because what I need is not a victim, Nora. What I need is a woman with a dead man's empire in her blood and enough fire to take it back." Nora looked at his hand. She looked at the black concrete ceiling. She thought of her father's voice on the phone, weak and fading, asking her to be careful, begging her to watch her back. She should have listened. She reached up with her good hand, bruised, cut, still trembling from the cold, and took his. Young Jay closed his fingers around hers. Not gently, not roughly, with the kind of grip that said, "This is sealed now, and what comes next will shake the foundations of everything your stepmother thinks she owns." He turned and walked toward the door. Stopped. Looked back over his shoulder. "The funeral is in 2 days. Your stepmother is burying an empty casket beside your father and calling it closure." His jaw tightened. That faint, terrifying smile appeared again, the one that didn't touch his eyes, the one that promised surgical, elegant, total destruction. "We're going to crash it." 2 days. 48 hours to turn a broken, half-drowned woman into a weapon that would walk into her own funeral and dismantle the people who put her in the ground. 48 hours to plan the single most devastating entrance anyone in that city had ever witnessed. And Odette? Odette spent those 48 hours picking out flowers for an empty casket. She had no idea what was coming for her. If you're still watching this, drop a comment right now and tell me, what would you do if someone pushed you out of a helicopter and then had the nerve to cry at your funeral? Because what Nora does next, it's going to make your jaw hit the floor. The morning of the funeral, Nora stood in front of a floor-length mirror in the east wing of Young Jay's fortress and did not recognize the woman staring back at her. 2 days ago, that woman had been drowning. 2 days ago, her shoulder was dislocated, her ribs were cracked, her blood was half frozen, and the only thing keeping her alive was a death grip on a phone and a refusal to stop breathing. Now she looked like a weapon. 3 days ago, she wouldn't look a stranger in the eye. Now she couldn't look away from herself, and neither could anyone else in the room. Young Jay's personal stylist, a razor-thin woman named Su Min, who hadn't smiled once in the 6 hours Nora had known her, had built the morning gown from scratch in under 36 hours. It was black, obviously, but not soft black, not grieving widow black. It was structural, architectural almost, with a high, rigid neckline that framed Nora's jaw like a throne frames a crown, and sharp, sculpted shoulders that turned her silhouette into something geometric and deliberate. The fabric was heavy, matte, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. The skirt fell in a single clean column to the floor. No train, no excess, nothing decorative. It was a gown designed to walk into a room and make every person in it understand that the woman wearing it had not come to mourn. She had come to collect. In the Korean syndicate, the clothes aren't fashion, they're communication. Every cut, every color, every detail sends a message to anyone who knows how to read it. What Sumin built for Nora that morning wasn't just a gown, it was a declaration of war in fabric. Sumin had pulled Nora's hair back tight, slicked flat against her skull, not a strand loose, not a single thing soft or approachable about it. Her makeup was precise, sharp cheekbones, clean brows, a matte lip so dark it was almost black. The bruises from the fall had been concealed. The cut above her left eye had been sealed and hidden. The only evidence of what had happened to Nora 3 days ago was the faint stiffness in her left shoulder and the look in her eyes, a look that hadn't existed before the helicopter door opened. Behind her, reflected in the glass, the door opened. Young Jay stepped in. Black suit, the same cut as always, bespoke, sculpted to his frame like it had been grown onto his body instead of sewn. No tie, top button undone. His hair was pushed back, and the scar on his jawline caught the cold light from the window. He stopped 3 feet behind her and looked at her reflection the way a general looks at a map before the order is given. The helicopter is fueled. Flight time to the city is 47 minutes. The funeral begins at noon. He checked his watch. A flat, black timepiece with no visible brand, because men like young Jay didn't wear names on their wrists. We land at 12:09. The priest will be mid-prayer. The cameras will be rolling. Nora met his eyes in the mirror. Good. He reached into his jacket and produced a slim black case. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a single earpiece, matte black, nearly invisible. My legal team will be on this channel. When the moment comes, they'll be ready. Nora took the earpiece and fitted it into her right ear. It disappeared against her skin. Young Jay closed the case, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression shifted. Not softened, not warmed, but adjusted, the way a locked vault adjusts when someone enters the correct combination. He looked at her reflection, the way a man looks at something he has decided belongs to him, and the decision is final, and the world can either accept it or be corrected. You walk in front, he said. Not beside me, not behind me, in front. I walk behind you because today, every person in that cemetery needs to understand one thing. You are not being escorted. You are being guarded. And the man guarding you is the last thing on earth they want as an enemy. Nora turned from the mirror and faced him directly. Her chin was level. Her spine was straight. The structural gown made her look 6 inches taller than she was, and the expression on her face, that devastating, unbothered calm, made her look like a woman who had already seen the worst thing the world could do to her and had decided it wasn't enough. Let's go bury them, she said. They walked side by side through the black concrete corridors of the fortress, past armed men who flattened against the walls as young Jay passed, past reinforced steel doors and surveillance banks, and the quiet, humming machinery of an empire that operated in permanent shadow. The helipad was on the roof, a flat expanse of gray concrete with the matte black military helicopter sitting at its center, rotors already turning. Nora climbed in first. Young Jay followed. The door sealed behind them with a pressurized hiss, and the helicopter lifted off the mountain and banked south toward the city. The last time Nora was inside a helicopter, she was pushed out of it. Now she was riding in one toward the funeral her murderers had organized in her name, sitting beside the most dangerous man in Korea, wearing armor disguised as grief, carrying a phone loaded with the footage that was about to destroy every person who thought she was dead. 47 minutes. That's how long Odette had left of her empire. She just didn't know it yet. At 12:07 p.m., the priest was reading from Psalms. The cemetery was immaculate, white roses on every surface, 2 mahogany caskets, one containing Silas Mensa, the other containing nothing but silk lining and the lie Odette had built her entire future on. Positioned side by side at the front of a pristine grass aisle, flanked by 200 seated mourners, board members, politicians, media executives, old money families. Photographers lined the perimeter. 3 news crews had set up behind the last row of chairs. Odette stood at the podium in a tailored black Valentino suit and a sheer veil she lifted periodically to dab at tears that materialized on command. Her eulogy had been flawless. 20 minutes of carefully constructed devastation, referencing Silas's beautiful spirit and Nora's tragic, senseless loss, with the kind of trembling sincerity that made 2 women in the 3rd row openly weep. Cressida sat in the front row, legs crossed, head bowed at the right angle, a tissue pressed to her nose. She had not cried once. The tissue was a prop. The priest cleared his throat. "Let us bow our heads for a final moment of silence to honor the memory of Silas Mensah and his beloved daughter, Nora." He didn't finish. The sound came from the north. Low at first, a distant rhythmic thudding that could have been construction equipment or a passing truck. But it grew, fast. The thudding became a roar, and the roar became a physical force, vibrating the ground, rattling the casket handles, shaking the white roses off their stems. The mourners looked up. The photographers turned. The priest stopped mid-sentence, his Bible still open, his mouth frozen around a word he would never complete. The helicopter came in low, absurdly low, aggressively low, the kind of altitude that says, "I am not asking permission to be here." Matte black and unmarked. The downdraft hit the cemetery like a detonation. Floral arrangements exploded. Petals and stems and leaves scattered across the grass like shrapnel. Women grabbed their hats. Men shielded their faces. The white roses draped across Nora's empty casket ripped free and tumbled across the lawn in a storm of ruined silk. The helicopter landed on the grass. The rotors slowed to a heavy, percussive idle that pulsed through the cemetery like a heartbeat. Odette's hand was frozen on the podium. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. The side door slid open. 3 men stepped out first. Young Jay's syndicate soldiers, each one in a black suit, each one built like a problem that couldn't be solved with conversation. They fanned out in a V formation, hands clasped, eyes scanning the crowd with practiced disinterest. Then Nora. She stepped down from the helicopter onto the cemetery grass, and 200 people forgot how to breathe. She was supposed to be dead. She was supposed to be inside that polished mahogany box. She was supposed to be a memory, a tragic footnote, a daughter lost too soon, a name carved into marble. Instead, she was standing on the lawn in a gown that looked like it had been forged instead of sewn, her hair pulled tight, her face composed into the kind of terrifying serenity that belongs to women who have been pushed past every limit and come out the other side as something the world has never seen before. She stood still for 3 full seconds, letting every camera, every eye, every stunned and gaping mouth take in the fact that she was alive, and then she began to walk. Behind her, 1 step back, moving with the slow, measured grace of a man who owned the ground beneath him regardless of whose name was on the deed, came young Jay, hands in his pockets, suit jacket unbuttoned, face a mask of cold, imperial calm, just the quiet, absolute certainty of a man who had already decided how this was going to end and was simply walking toward the knew everything, had everything, and was knew everything, had everything, and was afraid of nothing. The mourners sat paralyzed, some with hands over their mouths, some half standing, some reaching for their phones, all vibrating with the same wordless electric realization. The dead girl is walking toward her own casket, and she brought the Korean underworld with her. Cressida grabbed Odette's arm, hard, nails digging in, and hissed, "Mother, mother." Odette didn't move, couldn't move. Her face had gone from stage grief to real terror in under 4 seconds, and the transition was so violent that the veil slipped from her fingers and landed on the podium like a white flag. Nora didn't stop at the front row. She walked past the seated mourners, past the trembling priest, past Cressida's chalk-white face, past Odette's frozen body, and she stopped directly in front of her own empty casket. She looked at it. ran her fingers along the polished mahogany lid, tapped it once, a single, sharp knock, like she was checking to see if anyone was home. Then she turned around, faced the crowd, and reached into the hidden pocket Su-min had sewn into the gown's left panel. She pulled out her phone, the same phone she'd been clutching when she hit the water, the same phone that had been recording when Odette's palms pressed flat against her chest. The same phone that Young Jae's tech team had dried, unlocked, and loaded with 14 minutes of footage that was about to end 2 lives as completely as Odette had tried to end hers. She walked to the cemetery's sound system and plugged in a single auxiliary cable. The connection clicked. A low hum pulsed through the speakers. 200 people sat in absolute silence, watching a dead woman operate an audio system with the composure of someone queuing up a presentation. She hit me, play. The footage opened on mountains, clouds, the wide, bright interior of a helicopter cabin. Nora's own voice, lighter, younger, 3 days younger and a lifetime more naive, narrating to her father. "Look at this, Dad. You always said the mountains were God showing off." The crowd watched. Confused at first, some leaned forward. Then the footage shifted. The camera angle tilted as Nora turned toward the back of the cabin. 2 women, clearly visible, faces in full frame, unbuckling their seatbelts. The older one standing, the pilot reaching for a panel. The heavy thunk of the door unlocking. Wind. Chaos. And then, captured in pristine, unshakable, courtroom-ready 4K, Odette's face, filling the frame, her hands rising, her palms pressing flat against Nora's chest, and her voice, clear as a church bell over the roar of the wind. "Your father should have left the money to me." The push, the scream, the spinning sky. Static. The cemetery erupted. Not in applause. Not in gasps. In the kind of collective, visceral, full-body horror that comes when 200 people simultaneously realize they have been sitting at a funeral organized by a murderer. Women screamed, men shot to their feet. Phones came out, not to call anyone, but to record, because every person in that cemetery understood they were witnessing the single most devastating public exposure in the history of this city. Odette lunged for the phone. Cressida grabbed at the cable. 2 syndicate soldiers stepped between them and the casket with the kind of quiet, immovable physicality that said, "Touch that device, and we will relocate your hands." Odette spun toward the crowd, arms wide, voice cracking into something between a scream and a plea. "It doesn't matter. Do you understand? It doesn't matter what that video shows. I hold the will. I control the estate. The lawyers have already filed. Everything Silas owned is mine, legally, permanently, and no video from a dead girl's phone changes that." She was shaking. Spit gathered at the corners of her mouth. Her Valentino suit was askew, one lapel folded wrong, her composure shattered into pieces so small they could never be reassembled. She screamed it again, louder, like volume could make it true. "I have the will!" Odette thought the will was her last weapon, her shield, her proof that even if the video destroyed her reputation, the money was untouchable. She was clinging to that document the way Nora had clung to the helicopter door frame, desperately, with everything she had. But Nora had already learned what happens when you cling to something Odette has planned for you. You fall. And that was when young Jay moved. He had been standing behind Nora the entire time, still, silent, hands in his pockets, watching Odette's disintegration with the patient, clinical detachment of a surgeon observing a tumor he was about to remove. Now he stepped forward. 1 step. The crowd went quiet. Not because he raised his voice, not because he made a gesture. Because when young Jay moved, the air in any room he occupied rearranged itself around him, and every living thing in proximity understood, on a cellular level, that the center of gravity had just shifted. He removed 1 hand from his pocket and raised 2 fingers. From behind the helicopter, 4 men in gray suits walked forward. They were not syndicate soldiers. They were worse. They were lawyers. Young Jay's elite legal team, each one carrying a slim black leather portfolio, each one moving with the precise, synchronized efficiency of men who dismantled empires for a living and had never lost. The lead attorney, a tall, silver-haired Korean man with wire-framed glasses and the expression of someone who found human emotion professionally inconvenient, stopped in front of Odette, opened his portfolio, and removed a single document. "Mrs. Mensah-Laurent," he said, and his voice carried across the cemetery without effort. "The will in your possession, the document, filed with your attorneys 3 days ago, the document you are currently referencing as the basis for your claim to the Mensah estate, is a fabrication." Odette's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Silas Mensah drafted that document 9 months ago," the attorney continued. "He drafted it deliberately. He drafted it with the specific knowledge that you had been attempting to access his estate plan for over 2 years. He planted it in a location he knew you would search. His private study, 3rd drawer, beneath a false bottom he had installed for exactly this purpose." The attorney held up the document. "This is the real will, drafted in private, witnessed by 3 independent legal professionals, notarized, sealed, and stored in a secure facility operated by our firm on behalf of Mr. Mensah's personal estate." He turned the document so the crowd could see the notarized seal, the signatures, the date. "The real will leaves 100% of Silas Mensah's assets. Every company, every holding, every property, every account, to his biological daughter, Nora Mensah. There are no secondary beneficiaries. There are no conditional clauses. There is no provision for Mrs. Mensah-Laurent or her daughter under any circumstance." He closed the portfolio. "The document you killed for, Mrs. Mensah-Laurent, is a test. One you failed. Let that sink in. Silas, dying, bedridden, connected to machines that were counting down his final hours, had outsmarted the woman who thought she was the smartest person in the room. He had watched her search his study. He had watched her copy the fake will. He had watched her celebrate behind closed doors. And he had said nothing. He let her believe she had won because that belief was the bait, and her own greed was the trap. He gave the snake a mouse, and the mouse was made of poison. Silas Mensah didn't just protect Nora with a fake will. The security firm he hired to store the real document has connections to organizations that make even young Jay's syndicate pause. How a dying father built a posthumous fortress around his daughter is a story that deserves its own chapter. The silence that followed was so complete that Nora could hear the helicopter rotors still turning 200 feet behind her, slow and steady, like a pulse. Odette's knees buckled. Not dramatically, not the way she had performed grief at the podium 20 minutes ago. This was real. Her legs simply stopped working. Cressida caught her arm, but Cressida's face was the same shade of white as the roses scattered across the cemetery grass, and her grip was the grip of a woman who had just realized that every single thing she had counted on, the money, the power, the future, had been a trap built by a dead man who had seen her coming from the beginning. Silas knew. He had always known. Nora watched Odette collapse and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Not revenge. Just the clean, cold clarity of a woman standing on the other side of the worst thing that ever happened to her, looking back at the people who did it, and knowing, with absolute diamond-hard certainty, that it was over. The authorities arrived within minutes. They took Odette first. 2 officers gripping her arms as she screamed incoherently, mascara running in black rivers down her face, her Valentino suit torn at the shoulder where she'd struggled. Cressida went quieter. She walked between the officers with her jaw clenched and her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at Nora, refusing to look at the crowd, refusing to look at the cameras that were capturing every second of her mother's empire turning to ash. The cemetery emptied slowly. Mourners filed out in stunned, murmuring clusters, glancing back over their shoulders at the woman who had fallen from the sky, and the man standing behind her like a monument to everything money couldn't buy and power couldn't touch. When the last car pulled away and the last camera crew packed their equipment, and the cemetery was finally completely silent except for the wind moving through the trees, Nora walked to her father's casket. Not the empty one, the real one. The one that held the man who had loved her enough to see the danger she couldn't see, who had built a trap to protect her even from his deathbed, who had died with her name as the last word shaped by his failing heart. She placed both hands on the mahogany lid. The wood was warm from the sun, and for the first time since she opened her eyes in young Jay's fortress, Nora cried. Not the restrained, dignified tears of a woman performing strength. Real tears. Heavy, shaking, ugly. The kind that come from a place so deep inside your chest that they feel like they're being pulled out by the roots. She cried for her father. She cried for the version of herself that had climbed into that helicopter trusting the wrong people. She cried for the 3 days she'd spent in a mountain fortress, learning to harden, learning to plan, learning to turn her grief into a blade, when all she had really wanted was to hear her father's voice one more time. You knew, she whispered against the casket. You always knew. And you still protected me. Even when I couldn't protect myself. She pressed her forehead to the wood and stayed there. Behind her she heard footsteps on the grass. Slow. Measured. The kind of footsteps that never rush because the man making them has never needed to. Young Jay stopped beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her shoulder or offer empty words or try to pull her away from the casket before she was ready. He simply stood there, still, solid, immovable, and let her grieve on her own terms, in her own time, without a single demand. Then, without a word, he removed his suit jacket. He draped it over Nora's shoulders. The fabric was warm from his body and heavy in the way that expensive things are heavy, substantial, real, impossible to ignore. It settled over her mourning gown, like a second layer of armor, and the weight of it, the quiet, deliberate, possessive weight of it, said everything that words couldn't. You are not alone. You are not unprotected. And from this moment forward, anyone who wants to reach you will have to come through me first. Nora straightened. She pulled the jacket tighter around her shoulders. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Not delicately, not gracefully, just a raw, human gesture that smeared mascara across her knuckles and left her eyes red and swollen and absolutely, ferociously alive. She turned and looked at young Jay. He looked back, and for the second time since she'd known him, his expression shifted. Not softened, not surrendered, but opened, just barely. Just enough for her to see something behind the ice that he did not show to anyone else. It lasted half a second. Then the mask returned, and he was the boss again, and the world was his chessboard again, and every piece was exactly where he had placed it. But Nora saw it, and she would remember it. She turned back to the cemetery, the scattered roses, the empty casket, the torn floral arrangements, and the churned-up grass where the helicopter had landed. The ruins of Odette's performance, dismantled in under 15 minutes by a dead man's foresight and a living woman's refusal to stay buried. Nora pulled young Jay's jacket tight. She lifted her chin, and the new matriarch of the Mensa Empire walked back toward the helicopter, toward the man who had claimed her, toward the war chest her father had built, and the future her enemies had tried to steal, carrying nothing but a phone full of evidence, a name written into an unbreakable will, and the kind of fire that only burns in women who were supposed to die and chose, instead, to reign. Some people are born into power, some people earn it, and some people, the rare ones, the dangerous ones, have power forced onto them by the people who tried to take everything away. Nora didn't choose this life. She didn't wake up wanting a war. She woke up wanting her father to live, wanting her family to be real, wanting to believe that the people closest to her loved her even half as much as she loved them. They didn't. And that betrayal didn't break her. It built her. So if you're watching this and you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been pushed aside, counted out, written off by people who smiled in your face while planning your destruction, remember what Nora did. She hit the water. She fought the current. She dragged herself onto the shore. And then she walked into the room where they were celebrating her death, and she took back everything. That's not revenge. That's resurrection. Subscribe to this channel because Nora's story isn't over. The empire is hers now, but ruling it, with young Jay beside her, with enemies still circling, with the weight of her father's legacy pressing down on her shoulders. That war is just beginning. And you're going to want to be here when the next chapter drops. Comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. And if this story moved you, if it made your heart race or your jaw drop, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because everyone deserves to know, the people who push you down don't get to decide whether you stay down. Nora didn't.